identify that had anything remotely to do with Al-Qaeda was an old mujahideen who was a Yemeni that had fought on the US side in Afghanistan during the war against the Soviets and had issued some statements praising Al-Qaeda. He was not even middle management within Al-Qaeda, but the US had been told by Yemeni intelligence, this is like a capo don of terrorism in Yemen. I think the Yemeni government was under pressure from the Obama administration, and they gave up this village in the middle of nowhere they thought no one would ever go, and told the United States this is a terrorist training camp, when knowing well that it's a Bedouin village. So I have the list of all of the dead from Al-Majla. There were 14 women killed in that bombing, and 21 children. And it's not just that I have a list that someone gave me, which could be fallible or made up. We have video that was shot by surviving villagers with their cell phones, with the missiles still smoking, pulling babies out of rubble. You see limbs all over the place on these videos. They're so graphic. We didn't even put the more graphic elements of this in our film, and we had to blur out many of the images that we ended up putting in, because when we saw those videos ourselves, our stomachs turned. So you had the shredding of human beings with these flying landmines, these cluster bombs. And a few days after that bombing, some children were killed when an unexploded cluster bomb went off. And so this journalist had gone there, and it wasn't just about, oh, the Americans bombed an Al-Qaeda training camp. It was that this was, by their standard, it was a massacre of civilians, and he was reporting on this. So he gets abducted and then threatened and dumped back on the street. He keeps talking about it and keeps talking about it. He then has his house raided one night by Yemen's US-trained counterterrorism unit, the elite counterterrorism unit. And they snatch him out of his home, and they bring him back to the political prison, and they put him in the basement, and he disappears for 30 days. His family doesn't know where he is. He doesn't have access to any lawyers. He's just disappeared. And then they bring him into a cage on the 31st day in a court that was set up by the Yemeni dictator to prosecute journalists for committing crimes against the state. And they put him in this cage, and they charge him with being an Al-Qaeda facilitator, a propagandist for Al-Qaeda. And they say that he is involved with plots to attack foreign embassies in Yemen. And every major human rights organization in the world and media organization in the world condemned his trial as a sham trial and said that the court doesn't even pass the laugh test, in the words of the Committee to Protect Journalists. The journalists who knew Abdulelah Haider Shaye, journalists from major news organizations, all say that he was nothing but a good journalist. That the idea that he had connections to Al-Qaeda is so ridiculous for anyone that ever read his reporting. If anything, he was taking a risk by being critical of Al-Qaeda and of Salafism in general. He is related by marriage to one of the most famous radical clerics in Yemen, and he repeatedly attacked him and criticized him because he was a fiercely independent journalist. So he's put on this trial, this kangaroo courtroom, and he's sentenced to 5 years in prison for being an Al-Qaeda facilitator. There was outrage in Yemen from his tribe, from other tribes, from civic organizations, from legal organizations, and they go to Ali Abdullah Saleh, all of these groups and tribes, and they say, you have to free Abdulelah Haider Shaye. We all know that these charges are bogus. And Saleh told some of these organizations, the Americans told me that they want him in prison, so I can't release him. While he is in prison, the pressure becomes so strong on the regime, posters are put up around the Capitol demanding his release, that Ali Abdullah Saleh decides I have to pardon him, even if the Americans say that he has to stay there, because it's causing political problems for me at home that I don't want to confront, at a time when the Arab Spring was starting and uprisings were happening. So he decides he's going to issue a pardon. And news leaks in the local news service, the Saba news agency, that he's going to issue this pardon. That day, the president of Yemen receives a phone call from the White House, not from some deputy undersecretary of blah, 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 from the president himself.